Welcome to Over the Horizon. Today we have retired Lieutenant Colonel Kelly Latimer with us. She's the chief test pilot for Virgin Orbit's Launcher 1 program. And her history started at United States Air Force Academy, went into the C-141 and C-17 programs, became a test pilot. After September 11th, kind of left the test pilot field, went back into the operational C-17 cargo community, ended up deploying to Bagram, teaching the Iraqi Air Force cargo operations, mobility operations. Finished as the commander of the 418th Flight Test Squadron out at Edwards Air Force Base, and then moved over into NASA. Was the first female test pilot at NASA's Dryden Flight Research Center, and then worked with Boeing on a plethora of different platforms, testing for Boeing, and then finally ending up at Virgin Galactic and Virgin 1, being a test pilot on the main test pilot here on the Launcher 1 program. So Welcome, Colonel Latimer. Thanks for being here with us.
Thanks.
You have over 6,500 flight hours. So you kind of paved the way for test pilots, for women, kind of in that kind of environment, and then also in this space environment.
Yeah, space has always been a passion of mine. You know, from being a very small kid, I always wanted to be an astronaut, go into space, have anything to do with space, pretty much. So, yeah, that kind of is what led me to a test pilot career, and it's just been a lot of great opportunities that came my way to fly a lot of different airplanes, fly different programs, and the culmination for me at the end here is working for Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbit and getting to fly, you know, the potential for manned space flights, and then, you know, Launcher 1, putting small satellites in space.
Yeah, we appreciate your perspective. So. First question is, so Virgin Orbit, it's a brand new company, really, and what is y'all's perspective and vision of what is space going to look like 10 to 20 years from now, and then where do you fit into it?
Yeah, so Virgin Orbit, originally it all started as Virgin Galactic, and then it started with the Launcher 1 program, which is, we basically got a 747, modified it to carry a large liquid-fueled rocket on the left wing. It's a two-stage rocket to put small satellites in space. And it's since split off to be its own company from Virgin Galactic. But the vision of that company is to make space affordable and reachable to many different companies and many different designers of satellites. So right now, if you have a small satellite and you want to get it into orbit, your option is to pay a whole lot of money for a really big launch vehicle that you don't need, or what really happens is you have to tag along with someone else that has a big launch, and you're kind of a slave to their schedule, you know, and when they're going to go to orbit, what orbit they're going to go to. So we kind of found a niche in that market where no one's really serving the small satellite community. So our goal is to make it something that's affordable, reliable, and very flexible to get small satellites into space.
Okay. And you guys picked a 747. The Cosmic Girl, which you fly, pulled out, I think it's like 70,000 pounds of stuff out of the inside of the airplane, rewired it. Why did you pick that platform?
So one reason was when you take out a lot of the insides that you don't need, the airplane becomes very light, so it's got a lot of thrust. And also we knew that airplane had been modified by Boeing to carry a fifth engine in that same spot, so there's already a place there for connecting hardware, and it had already been tested to have a large, you know, object there between the number 2 engine and the fuselage. So we know it already had that pedigree, and just with the, you know, the redundancy of having 4 engines, you know, instead of just 2, and the ability to put a large object between the inboard engine on the left side is what led us down the road to a 747.
Okay. And see, Virgin Orbit, it advertises $12 million a launch right now?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, okay. That's the price. And it's anywhere from, you know, the payloads could be about the highest we could do would be 500 kilograms. We had the ability to do 2 small sats, or if you have CubeSats, you could do 10 to 20 of those. So it's a variety of what we can put as far as a payload in the satellites. And the other big advantage of our project is because we're air launched, we can, you know, take the airplane, you take the rocket to the launch site that you want. You're not tied to one launch site, so we don't have to be, you know, based off the West Coast or based off the East Coast. Right now, we're actually pursuing Guam as an alternative to be able to take off and get an equatorial launch, so we can have a nice short flight, you know, from Guam down to the equator and get a satellite in orbit there. So our mobility is another thing that makes us unique.
Okay. So some potential adversaries out there, specifically China and Russia, have developed a lot of anti-sat capabilities over the last 10, 20 years, and they've advertised them, they've even demonstrated them. So from a military point of view, we're looking at all these emerging companies. You guys kind of fit a unique niche. Like you said, you can fly around weather, you can launch into any orbit, you can go most places in the world to launch. So how do you guys see that flowing into military applications in the future? Or is that something you're considering?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're considering, and I think it's a pretty good fit. I mean, it's a good fit for the commercial market, but there's also definitely opportunities for the military market. So besides just being able to go anywhere, and launch where we want to, as long as we get a runway to operate out of, the other big advantage is if you have the ability to get small satellites up affordably, where you're not paying $100 million for one launch, it may actually drive you to a strategy of, instead of one satellite that does a whole lot of stuff that's very expensive, you take that and break it out into 4 or 5, because now those 4 or 5 you can launch at a reasonable price each. And so now you sort of take your one asset, you have some redundancy, and maybe it's more targets than just one. So I think there's other opportunities as you make things affordable and quick turn, and you can do a lot of launches. You're not just one launch this year. It could be we'll launch once a week.
Is that your turnaround time, or are you guys kind of going to shoot for a once a week capability?
Yeah, I think the ultimate is actually to be able to do a 24-hour turnaround time, because really the limitation for us would be how fast we can produce the rocket. So it's not really going to be the availability of the launch site and that stuff, because we can go out of the water and launch almost anywhere. So it's really how fast we can produce rockets. And then also the turn time between the refueling operation, going and doing launch and coming and landing. So right now, with one airplane, we're targeting to be able to do a 24-hour turnaround, where we could do 2 satellites, back to back in a 24-hour time frame. And then if our model is successful and we're able to make this program work, then we go out and get another 747, And the nice thing is, right now they're pretty cheap, because everyone is retiring their 747s and going with twin engines. So it's actually affordable for us to go out now and grab a couple other airplanes. But we're in this phase right now where we're doing the initial test to prove the concept. So once we get to our first launch and then repeat it, then we know we have something that we can start moving forward on quickly.
Now, how deployable would you be? Like you said, if you wanted to leave home base, go to Guam and launch from Guam, could you send several rockets out there and do a 24-hour turnaround time in over 5 days and launch 5 rockets?
Yep, you could. What we would have to do is we essentially have our platform where we do the refueling is basically mobile. Like, we don't have a set place. Right now we're going to do it all at Mojave, because that's where we're doing our testing, and that's where our FAA launch license allows us to operate out of. So we'll have all these trailers that do the refueling, but once we're done there, we may launch out of Space Coast, Florida next. So we just truck all that stuff over to Florida, and then we do our operation there. And then when it comes time to go to Guam, we'll probably have a second set, ship it out there, and just have it there ready to go. So all we need to keep is our rocket fueling capability wherever we're going to launch, and then the airplane just goes and we ship the rockets.
Okay, so pretty flexible kind of a asset.
Yep.
And then, so low Earth orbit is kind of what you're shooting for now. Is there any capacity to go higher than that, or is that just kind of the limit?
It probably depends on the payload that we need to get there, but that's our focus right now is low Earth orbit, because generally the small sats and CubeSats are generally a low Earth orbit type satellite type operation. So our focus mostly is on everything in both companies, Virgin Orbit and Virgin Galactic, is basically Earth-centered. So we're not, hey, let's go to the moon, let's go to the Mars. We're pretty much, centered around the Earth, and again, making it affordable to get in space, to get satellites in space, and most of that market is low Earth orbit. So right now, that's our focus. Yeah.
Okay. And so how realistic, you're the chief test pilot, so you know the technological problems and how complicated it could be it's easy to say something like this and it sounds cool. But I know that there's a high angle of attack that this thing is launched at, trying to rewire a whole aircraft like that. This is an aircraft that carried passengers for Virgin for a long time, right? Right,
yes, yeah, we got it from Virgin Atlantic, so a sister company is where we acquired the
and then reconstituting it, you're supposed to launch your first rocket this year?
Yeah, so it should be hopefully third quarter this year is our goal.
Okay, and is the company on track to do that, or?
It's we're just to the point now where we're and actually, so the modification isn't. The operation is actually fairly simple, and the rocket itself is actually fairly simple. It's a matter of getting it all to come together. So the aircraft had a structural modification done to the left wing, and then we pulled out everything on the main deck to get rid of all the extra weight. And then we ran some wiring, out to where the rocket's going to be attached. Other than that, the nice thing for us is the rest of the airplane is untouched. So it is a 747. It operates like a 747. The procedures are the same, the display. So we send the pilots to get a type rating, and that's it. Then all you need to understand is the rocket that's on the wing, what its systems are, and it's actually fairly, the integration is actually fairly easy. Then the company built a pylon that gets attached to the wing, and then to that we go the rocket. So we are at the point now where we're getting ready to attach our pylon to the aircraft, and we'll go out and we'll do some flight testing. And it's a fairly big, I mean, the pylon's about 13,000 pounds, so it's a pretty massive structure to hold that rocket. So we'll go out probably in about 3 weeks from now and start our initial testing with the pylon, and then our test rocket is actually ready to go. So we have a full-up rocket, but it's empty, nothing in the tank, so we'll attach that and we'll go fly just with the empty rocket to get some aerodynamic numbers, some structural data, and then we fill it up with water and baffle balls to keep the water from sloshing around too much, because you don't need much water to simulate being liquid oxygen. And then we'll finish out that testing, and right after that is time for a real rocket, fuel it up, and launch.
Okay. What is the biggest technological hurdle? What's the thing hanging you guys up the most?
Some of our issues are the ability to keep the LOX cool enough to get enough distance away. So right now we're good to take off out of Mojave and get out and do a launch. But if we have to go much further than that, it's a challenge for us to keep the LOX cool enough to have the appropriate energy to actually get the satellite to the orbit that we're looking for. Okay. So that's some of the things we're working now. So it's most of the challenge is on the rocket side. So it's the ability to get enough thrust with the payload. Some of the other technologicals are depending on what payload is going to go up front. As the center of gravity of the rocket changes, that changes some of the dynamics too. So we're going through a little bit of a structural analysis right now to see exactly how far forward we could get the payload, and what some of the weight limitations might be on the payload, or the center of gravity limitations might be. Okay.
So some of the aerodynamic stuff, and then the LOX being the liquid oxygen rocket fuel is hard to manage over long distances.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, your unique experience of being an Air Force pilot and then a test pilot, an operational mobility pilot, but then you worked for NASA, you worked for Boeing, and now working for Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbital. What are the lessons, so looking back into your military brothers and sisters, kind of what are the lessons that you guys have learned or that you see in Virgin Orbital, where you've done an enormous amount of time in a short, or enormous amount in a short amount of time,
right? And
you guys have accomplished a lot. You still have problems to solve, but you've solved a lot.
Right.
We always kind of argue about the bureaucracy differences between all the kind of different organizations, but how can the military be more rapid in its acquisitions? Should it leverage companies like yours, or should it internally be doing these things, and what's holding it back?
Yeah, I think in a way, like, leveraging industry is good, because industry will tend to be very focused, economical, and efficient at what it does. So when you look at the different companies, it's interesting. So you look at Boeing. So Boeing's a commercial airplane. So it does commercial airplanes extremely well. It does production as efficient as you can get it. It knows certification via FAA standards of new airplanes. So it does that extremely well. It still is a fairly large company, so sometimes when you start doing other stuff, when you get into the military side and derivatives, you tend to get maybe a little more overhead and other processes that aren't quite as lean, but it does commercial certification extremely well. Then you go to NASA. NASA does research. They're research and development, so they're not really a production, get things certified. They're sort of they are set up to do far-looking research and development and aerodynamics. And then you look at the military, and the thing is that the military has a lot of bureaucracy, and it does need to get cut down. But the thing about the military is that they are bringing in people brand new. So a lot of the stuff that's being operated, is people doing, I got my experience flight testing in the Air Force, right? And then because I had that experience, NASA picks me up. So now NASA gets to be a little more efficient because they grab me, but I learned everything, from my time in the military. And Boeing does the same thing. It grabs guys who are experienced. So what does Virgin do? They go out and grab the best they can get, highly experienced, and they only need 2 or 3 people, and you don't need a bunch of processes because you have people that have worked in 3 or 4 different companies, and they have this big bag of tricks they can bring. So sometimes I think although it is true that the military does need to cut down bureaucracy, that's definitely, I don't think that's a question, but sometimes it's a little bit unfair to compare the companies, because I'm not, who I am now is not who I was when I was captain, Kelly Latimer coming out of test pilot school. Like, I could have never jumped into this job and done it right then. So I think the advantage of industry is they can focus on what they need to do well for their product. They can grab experienced people, and the military struggles because they have to be able to do their job with sometimes very new, very young, inexperienced airmen.
Yeah, that's true. Well, good. Well, thanks so much for coming here, and we've really enjoyed it. We enjoy your perspective and appreciate it, and best of luck later this year launching
Thank
the
you.
first Launcher 1.
My pleasure.
All right, thanks.
All right.